Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger just made a move so bold, the world doesn't know whether to panic or applaud. Three nations, one confederation, standing up in Niamey and slamming their fists on the table. And yet, while Western diplomats call it reckless, millions across Africa are calling it justice. Because for decades, courts in Europe judged African leaders like schoolchildren, while their own crimes went untouched. Here's the twist. These Sahel states aren't just walking away from the International Criminal Court. They're building their own court, right on African soil. Now, before we dive deeper, let's pause. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments below. Whether you're in New York, Lagos, or Paris, tell us how this news hits you personally. Your perspective matters, and this channel is built on the conversations we spark together. Welcome to Africa Daily Good News. Here we break down the stories shaking the continent and connect them to global audiences, from everyday Africans to curious Americans and beyond. We're not just reporting headlines, we're building a community that thinks critically, debates freely, and isn't afraid of the tough questions. So stick with us, hit subscribe if you haven't yet. Because this isn't just news, it's history unfolding in real time. And with that, let's move straight into what really happened in Niamey, and why the Sahel just flipped the script on global justice. Niamey didn't wake up to silence. It woke up to rebellion. On September 16, 2025, the justice ministers of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger didn't gather to negotiate. They gathered to sever the cord that ties them to The Hague. They accused the International Criminal Court of bias, of being nothing more than a colonial whip disguised in legal robes. That accusation landed like thunder, because for decades the ICC has built its reputation as the guardian of justice, yet nearly all its first investigations targeted Africa. And now the Sahel is asking, justice for whom? What shocks many in Washington and Brussels is not just the exit itself, but the ambition behind it. These nations aren't storming out of the ICC just to sit in the dark. They're building their own court, right on African soil. A Sahalian Criminal Court for Human Rights. Imagine that shift. Instead of dossiers stacked in European towers, trials will unfold in the Sahel, tackling terrorism, organized crime, and human rights abuses rooted in African realities. Some might dismiss this as fantasy, but history has shown that once people build alternatives, institutions start to look less untouchable. Americans know this paradox well. Remember how the colonies once rejected the Crown's law only to create their own? And here's where the story twists again. On paper, withdrawal takes a year, meaning warrants and cases against Sahel leaders still hover in the air. Investors, aid groups, and Western officials hope that delay will break the momentum. But, on the other hand, Africans see the delay as proof of hypocrisy. The West insists on rules only when it protects their interests. It's a tug of war between legal technicalities and raw political will. Which usually wins? If you think about human behavior, people rarely leave a system unless they're cornered. Most Americans stay with a bank they don't trust simply because switching feels messy. But when the fees pile up, when the disrespect becomes obvious, they finally walk away. The Sahel's leaders are acting out that same instinct, only on a global stage. One trader in Niamey told local reporters, "For years we were judged by courts far away, judges who never set foot on our soil. Now, at least, my children will see justice in a language they understand." That single comment captures the before and after, from distant rulings to ownership of the process. It's not perfection, but it's power. And as the dust settled after that September meeting, one thing became clear. This wasn't an isolated tantrum. It was part of a pattern of defiance stretching back years. The ICC may just be the latest domino to fall, but not the last. The question is what comes next, and whether the world is ready for the chain reaction already in motion. The louder the Sahel roared, the quieter the West seemed to breathe. Newsrooms in Paris and Washington spun the announcement as reckless, even dangerous, while African streets called it liberation. This paradox isn't new. Whenever the powerful lose their grip, they call it chaos. And yet, to millions across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the chaos feels like clarity. Reports from Niamey confirmed that the exit papers from the International Criminal Court are already prepared. Legal experts point out the process takes 1 year, but that waiting period might be the most dangerous part. Western governments see 12 months as their window to pressure, sanction, or destabilize. But for the Sahel, the countdown is a test of endurance, a chance to show they won't blink. And after that, the bigger twist emerges. The creation of the Sahalian Criminal Court isn't just symbolic. It's designed to absorb cases the ICC would have claimed, from jihadist massacres to smuggling cartels. Still, there's a human contradiction at play. Most people resist change, even when they know the old system is broken. According to behavioral studies in the US, the average American stays with the same health insurance plan for years, even if it's expensive, simply because switching feels risky. The Sahel leaders are defying that instinct, taking the leap that most individuals never dare. Doesn't that raise the question, what does it take for people to finally say, enough? On the ground, the contrast is stark. A school teacher in Ouagadougou told a journalist, "My students don't even know where the Hague is, but they know when their cousins are killed in attacks. If justice doesn't speak our language, it isn't justice." That before and after view, foreign rulings versus local ownership, shows why this decision resonates more with ordinary Africans than with foreign diplomats. And yet, critics warn of another twist hidden beneath the celebration. Without funding, judges, and strong independence, the Sahalian court could risk becoming a political toy, a shield for coup-born leaders rather than a sword for the people. It's a fair concern, and it lingers like a shadow behind every cheer. Still, the momentum feels irreversible. The ICC was once a giant in the African imagination, but giants shrink when people stop fearing them. What began as defiance in a single summit now carries the weight of a continent's frustration. And as each headline fades, the silence that follows is not emptiness. It's the sound of the world waiting, wondering what this trio will strike down next. Justice is supposed to be blind, yet somehow Africa always ends up in its crosshairs. Since the International Criminal Court was created in 2002, 47 of its 54 indictments have been African. Every single one of its first 10 investigations targeted this continent. That imbalance is not just a statistic, it's a wound. And when wounds are ignored long enough, people stop asking for healing. They demand a cure of their own. The irony is obvious. Western war crimes in Iraq, Afghanistan, even Palestine rarely see the inside of a courtroom. But African leaders, they become the poster boys for global justice. It's like a referee who only ever throws flags at one team. After a while, the game itself loses credibility. Americans understand this feeling in their own way. Studies show that most U.S. workers believe corporate misconduct often goes unpunished, while small offenses by individuals are prosecuted harshly. That frustration with selective justice explains why so many viewers across continents nod when they hear the Sahel's defiance. There's also a human truth here. People accept discipline only if they believe the rules apply to everyone. If your neighbor speeds every day without a ticket, how long before you stop respecting the speed limit? The Sahel states are channeling that same instinct. They see the ICC punishing Africa while shielding the powerful elsewhere, and they've decided the rules no longer deserve their obedience. In Bamako, one activist recalled a story from his childhood. His father had been fined for selling goats without the right paperwork, while European companies nearby mined gold with no licenses, no taxes, no punishment. That contrast stayed with him. "It taught me early," he said, "that justice wasn't about right and wrong. It was about who had power." It's hard not to hear echoes of that story when you watch this break from The Hague. Of course, some critics argue that creating a Sahalian criminal court is risky, that it might turn into a shield for military rulers rather than a sword for ordinary people. But maybe that's the hidden twist. The same nations once written off as unstable are now forcing the world to confront its double standards. And whether the court succeeds or fails, the fact that they dared to imagine it already shifts the balance. This is where the mood rises. For decades, Africa was told it had no choice but to obey international rules. Today, the narrative flips. Choice itself has become the weapon, and the more that choice is exercised, the harder it becomes for outsiders to dismiss. The question left hanging is simple but profound. If the Sahel can rewrite its script, who's next? So if you're following this story from the US, from Europe, or from Africa itself, consider this. Selective justice is not an African problem. It's a human problem. And maybe it's time to ask ourselves whether we'd accept those odds if the roles were reversed. That thought alone leads us straight into the next chapter of this struggle, where resistance is not just legal, it's cultural, economic, and deeply personal. The strangest part of this rebellion is how familiar it feels. The Sahel's decision to abandon the International Criminal Court didn't erupt in isolation. It is the latest step in a trail of exits, each one severing another cord that tied these nations to systems they no longer trusted. First came the collapse of the French-backed G5 Sahel. Then the dramatic withdrawal from accuse in early 2024, when sanctions crushed their economies but couldn't bend their will. After that, the Organization of La Francophonie was tossed aside. Now, the ICC joins the heap. Each move seemed reckless at first, but together they form a pattern, a deliberate rejection of what these governments call neocolonial structures. And here's the hidden twist. What outsiders interpret as isolation, locals frame as liberation. It's a question of perspective, much like how most Americans see quitting a job without another offer as risky, while others call it brave. According to surveys, nearly 70% of U.S. workers admit they've stayed in roles they hate simply to avoid uncertainty. Nations, like people, often cling to the familiar even when it hurts. The Sahel has chosen the harder road, the one fewer are willing to take. On the streets of Bamako, a taxi driver summed it up with raw honesty. Before, we were told to wait for others to fix our problems. Now, at least, we are fixing them ourselves, even if it's messy. That simple before and after captures the shift from dependency to self-definition. What seems unstable from afar feels like dignity up close. Yet beneath this surge of confidence lies another twist of irony. By cutting ties with global institutions, these nations may expose themselves to short-term instability, rising prices, limited trade, tighter sanctions. But the deeper they push forward, the harder it becomes to reverse course. It's like a bridge already set aflame behind them. There's no way back to the comfort of old arrangements, only the uncertain promise of new ones. And that uncertainty is precisely where the energy builds. To some, it looks like collapse. To others, it looks like rebirth. Either way, momentum is carrying the Sahel forward, pulling the region into a space where law, politics, and sovereignty are no longer dictated from the outside. The question lingering now is not whether they can resist the past. It's whether they can shape the future before the pressure crushes them. That tension, fragile yet electrifying, sets the stage for what comes next. A battle not just over justice, but over survival itself. The men leading this charge don't look like diplomats. They look like soldiers who never left the battlefield. Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, Colonel Assimi Goïta in Mali, and General Abdourahmane Tchiani in Niger are not the polished suits of international forums. They are coup-born leaders who speak more like warriors than politicians. And in that contrast lies the shock. The world expected them to collapse under sanctions, but instead, they've tightened their grip on power and expanded their influence. Observers point out that since 2023, these three nations have moved in lockstep, rejecting Western military pacts, pushing out French troops, and inviting Russian advisors. Each move deepened fears in Europe, yet bolstered confidence at home. The paradox is striking. In most cases, sanctions choke governments into concessions. Here, the sanctions became fuel for defiance. Isn't it strange how pressure that breaks one leader can harden another? If we think in human terms, the pattern is familiar. Psychologists note that most Americans facing economic stress will either shrink into caution or double down with risky choices. The Sahel has chosen the second path, gambling on sovereignty even when the odds look impossible. That gamble taps into a universal instinct. When cornered, some people find clarity they never knew they had. A farmer near Kaya described how his outlook changed when French forces withdrew. Before, we waited for protection that never came. After they left, we realized it was us or no one. My sons joined the local defense group. I started carrying water to the fighters. We stopped waiting. His words reveal the before and after of ordinary life. Dependency turning into action, fear transforming into resilience. But here's the twist within the twist. While their rhetoric paints them as liberators, critics warn these leaders are also consolidating power under the banner of sovereignty. What begins as rebellion against foreign control could quietly become a tighter grip of domestic rule. That contradiction hangs heavy, yet it doesn't erase the reality that their bold stance has captured imaginations across Africa. This duality between freedom and control, between survival and ambition, is what makes the Sahel story so magnetic. It's not neat, it's not comfortable, and it's not over. And as these leaders continue to redefine their nation's place in the world, the ripple effect is spreading far beyond their borders, shaping not only politics, but the psychology of an entire region. That ripple, like a widening circle on water, is already pulling in other African states and raising questions about how far this wave can travel before it collides with the global order itself. Justice isn't supposed to come with an accent, yet in Africa, it almost always does. Courtrooms in The Hague speak in polished European languages, far from the dusty villages where crimes unfold. That distance has always been more than geography. It's a psychological gap that made many Africans feel judged but never heard. By breaking away, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are not just rejecting indictments, they're rejecting that entire sense of disconnection. Analysts warn the move carries heavy risks. The one-year delay before ICC withdrawal takes effect leaves their leaders exposed to ongoing investigations. Some warrants may still shadow them, and international investors hesitate when uncertainty looms. But, on the other hand, the creation of a Sahalian Criminal Court flips that fear into defiance. Instead of waiting for rulings from Europe, the Sahel now promises justice built on local realities: terror attacks in Timbuktu, smuggling in Agadez, or massacres in northern Burkina Faso. That promise resonates even if the court is still just blueprints on paper. It's easy to dismiss this as political theater, but consider the human side. Most people, whether in America or Africa, prefer systems they can see and touch. According to surveys, U.S. citizens trust their local courts more than distant federal agencies, simply because proximity breeds belief. The Sahel leaders are betting on the same instinct, that people will trust justice if it feels like their own. Doesn't that logic make sense, even if you don't agree with their politics? One young law student in Niamey told a reporter that his dream of becoming a judge suddenly feels possible. Before, I imagined a career that would never leave the shadow of France. After this, I see a chance to serve my people, not someone else's rules. That story, small as it is, captures the before and after of an entire generation. A court that doesn't just punish but inspires. Still, the deeper twist is hidden in plain sight. For decades, Western media portrayed the Sahel as unstable, chaotic, and dependent. Now, the very instability once mocked has become fuel for reinvention. The more the old order collapses, the more room there is to build something new. It's fragile, yes, but fragility doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it means rebirth. That fragile sense of rebirth is now spilling into other arenas beyond law. What started in the courtroom debate is already bleeding into the economy, the military, and even the cultural imagination of the Sahel. And it's in that wider transformation where the stakes climb higher and the questions grow harder. What shocks the world most is not the exit itself, but the momentum it carries. The Confederation of Sahel States is no longer just reacting. It is setting the agenda, piece by piece, and daring others to follow. What began with troops leaving French bases has spiraled into the rejection of entire global institutions, and now the creation of a court that belongs to them alone. The twist is that every move once mocked as impossible has become precedent, and precedents, once set, spread quickly. Observers warn that the risks remain enormous: sanctions, isolation, economic shocks. Yet even those warnings sound strangely familiar. The same language was used when they quit ECOWAS, when they pulled out of the G5 Sahel, when they cut ties with La Francophonie. And each time, instead of collapsing, they stitched tighter bonds among themselves. It's almost as if every punishment from outside only reinforces unity inside. Doesn't human behavior often work that way? When a family feels attacked, members stop fighting one another and close ranks against outsiders. Nations, it seems, are no different. There's also a generational edge to this. Most young Africans have grown up watching their leaders bend under pressure. Now, they're witnessing leaders who refuse. In the US, surveys show that millennials are more likely than their parents to quit jobs, move states, or change careers when they feel trapped. The Sahel's youth are watching their governments do the same thing on a continental scale, walking away from what feels exploitative and building something of their own. A student in Ouagadougou described it this way: "Before, my friends dreamed of leaving for Europe. After these changes, they talk about staying to build something here." That subtle shift, migration versus commitment, may be the most powerful transformation of all. It turns resignation into ambition, despair into pride. Of course, there's another twist buried in this wave of optimism. If the new Sahalian Criminal Court succeeds, it may inspire other African states, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, even Nigeria, to question whether global institutions truly serve them. If it fails, the narrative of Africa being unable to govern itself will return stronger than ever. The stakes are not just legal but symbolic. They define how the world sees Africa and how Africa sees itself. That tension between success and failure, hope and fear, is where the Sahel stands now. And as this movement expands beyond borders, it doesn't just ask what Africa will become. It quietly challenges the entire global order to decide how much change it can withstand before breaking. The strangest irony is that by leaving the International Criminal Court, the Sahel may have put justice back on trial. For years, Africa was the defendant, its leaders paraded as examples of global accountability. Now, the court itself is being judged, accused of bias, hypocrisy, and colonial echoes. And in that reversal lies the deeper twist. The institution that once claimed to hold power now struggles to defend its own legitimacy. The decision of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger is more than a legal maneuver. It's a declaration that sovereignty outweighs compliance, and yet sovereignty isn't free. Sanctions still bite, economies still wobble, and extremists still circle. But compare the mood before and after. Once, fear of punishment kept these nations quiet. Today, the fear is different, not of the West's reaction, but of failing to deliver on their promise of independence. That shift, from external obedience to internal accountability, may be the most radical change of all. Think of it in everyday terms. Most Americans, according to surveys, stay tied to credit cards or service providers even when they're dissatisfied because switching feels risky. But when they finally cut the cord, they rarely go back. The Sahel's leaders are acting out that same human instinct. Once you've tasted ownership, dependency feels unbearable. Doesn't that echo with anyone who has ever walked away from a system that never served them? A story from a market in Bamako drives the point home. A woman selling rice recalled how, under sanctions, prices soared and neighbors whispered that the government would cave. Instead, she says, "We shared what little we had. It was harder, yes, but for the first time we felt the struggle belonged to us, not to someone else's orders." Her words carry the paradox of pain and pride, the kind that transforms hardship into identity. This is why the Sahel's gamble matters. If the new court works, it could inspire other African states to reclaim control over law, trade, even money itself. If it fails, it could reinforce every stereotype the West clings to. That tension between triumph and collapse is the story now unfolding, and no outsider can predict where it will end. What's certain is that the world can no longer ignore the question Africa is asking: who decides what justice looks like, and who gets to enforce it? The answer won't come from The Hague alone, nor from speeches in New York. It will be written in dusty courtrooms in Niamey, in classrooms in Ouagadougou, in the choices ordinary people make when they refuse to bow to systems that never saw them as equals. And as the Sahel moves forward, one image lingers. Not of leaders in suits, but of citizens standing taller, insisting that their future is not a verdict handed down. It's a case they will argue for themselves.